Welcome, everyone, to Zoom into Books this afternoon. We have multi-award winning author Richard Battle and guest interviewer Burke Allen discussing Richard's new book in his American Who Made America series. So, Burke, take it away.
Hey there, thank you so much for joining us. This is a very special simulcast of our Big Time Talker podcast with our friends from Headline Books and their Zoom into Books video and audio podcast series. And why is it the Big Time Talker podcast? We talk to authors and speakers and entertainers and great Americans who have big ideas, big stories to tell. And today is no exception. In just a moment, we'll talk with award-winning author Richard Battle. The book is AmeriCANS, Who Made America. And it's all about the great Americans in the 19th century and what a pivotal decade in America's history that was. Our podcast is a service of our friends at speakermatch.com. Speaker Match is the world's largest online virtual speakers bureau. If you're a platform speaker and you need places to do your thing, or maybe you're a meeting planner, you need great speakers, you can find one another at speakermatch.com. You know, we have new episodes of the Big Time Talker podcast every Tuesday at Spotify, Apple, iTunes, wherever you hear great conversation. And let's get this one started with Richard Battle, the multi-award winning author of AmeriCANS, Who Made America. He joins us from his palatial Austin, Texas estate, where this time of the year it's about 120 in the shade. Hello, sir.
Good afternoon, Burke. Thank you for having us with you. And we thank Kathy Teets for Zooming to Books and having us there as well.
Your publisher, Headline Books, has just released AmeriCANS, Who Made America. This is the second book in the series. What do you mean by AmeriCANS? And then how did they make America?
Well, that's interesting. And so I'm going to go back into history because this project really started 4 years ago. And I was 2/3 of the way on another project. And all of a sudden, I got frustrated and irritated with our culture, our media, our elected officials, because all that was emanating from all of them was negativity and how we couldn't do things. And we needed government to do things for us. And kids today couldn't have better lives than their parents. And so that inspired me to write the first book, which is really kind of a precursor, called Made in America by AmeriCANS, not AmeriCANS, celebrating the American-do spirit. And it's a series of essays that come from a leadership standpoint to try to help people embrace that can-do spirit and lead more positive lives. And within that series of essays, we gave examples of some historical figures who had exhibited that American-do spirit, because I believe that's what's made our country successful for the last 250 years. And that can-do spirit is what's going to help us be successful going forward. So this was the foundation of what we're doing today.
So these books, these AmeriCANS, they exist today. And many might say to you, Richard Battle, history, kind of a snooze fest when I took it in high school. Why do we care? So why should we care about what happened 200 years ago, 100 years ago?
Well, I'll tell you some stories here in a minute that I think will help people hopefully rethink their thinking,
Okay.
because history is prologue. We learn the lessons from history. I believe smart people learn from their experiences, and brilliant people learn from the experiences of others. And as Eleanor Roosevelt said, it's important for us to learn from other people's experiences because we don't have enough life to have all the experiences ourselves. And so when we put Made in America out, and we were talking to people about having a great American Hall of Fame, and I discovered there was one, but I'd never heard of it. And so then the inspiration came, well, if you can't go to the Hall of Fame in New York, why not bring the Hall of Fame to other people? And so the inspiration came to divide our history up in centuries and try to profile individuals from a wide, diverse group who had that American-do spirit, share that with people, and hopefully inspire them and their children and grandchildren to adopt or embrace or enhance their American spirit and chase their dreams and grab opportunities and be more than they are today. And in doing that, they will help our country to be better as well. And so the first volume in that was last year, and that was Americans Who Made America. And it was the 18th century where we celebrated the founding of the country and many of the people from that period of time. And that led us this year to the 19th century, second volume of this series, with two more planned for the 20th century and then going back to the 16th and 17th century.
So, I teased you a little bit about history being a snooze fest. It really is in the way those stories are told and the way they're related. And I got to tell you, I had some high school history teachers, and it was like watching paint peel. But you, you have found some interesting stories, and I read the first book, and I'm excited to read the new one about historical figures, some of which we know, some of which I had never heard of. And those were the ones that really resonated with me. So the one about what happened in the 1700s, of course, you talked about George Washington and Betsy Ross, but there were also others. So we're going to talk about the new book in a second, but tell me somebody from the founding of America, that whole pivotal time that maybe our listeners have never heard of, and you discovered their story and you thought it needed to be told.
Well, that's very purposeful because I believe the country was founded with everyone contributing. I believe our success since then is because everyone contributing, and our success today and in the future will be because of everyone contributing, everyone doing their jobs and pursuing their lives. Anything that's legal in a job situation contributes to the benefits of the country. So not everyone's going to be well known, but I believe that as long as we have breath, we have opportunity to impact today and influence the future. So in the 18th century book, one of the characters I discovered was Billy Lee. And I'll tell that name to people and they'll turn their heads and they'll say, "Who's Billy Lee?"
Why is
And
he?
he was a young African American. He was George Washington's valet, if you will.
Okay.
And so he didn't write any Federalist Papers. He didn't serve in the Continental Congress, but he was George Washington's assistant. And what I envision, and I'll give you the example, I envision him encouraging George Washington in the darkest days. "General, you can do it. General of men will follow you." And giving George Washington inspiration in addition to the other chores that he did. The example is George Patton. If you'll remember in the movie Patton, he had a sergeant that assisted him named George. And George was the same type of person in that he encouraged Patton because when you're at that level of executive, you don't have many people you can confide in.
That's
And
right.
so I believe Billy Lee was a confidant. And you say, "Well, why do you think that?" Well, Billy Lee was the only enslaved person that Washington had that was mentioned by name in his will. He was allowed to live at Mount Vernon the rest of his life, and he is buried at Mount Vernon. So he was treated totally differently than any of the other people in the Washington household. And that tells me that he meant a lot to George Washington. And you're sitting there thinking of his encouragement of Washington. Think how that impacted Washington's decisions and actions and could have been critical in the founding of the country.
AmeriCANS Who Made America, second book of the series, is available now from Headline Books. Richard Battle is the author. When you sit down to write these books and you begin that research process, it's much easier now. We can Google lots of things. There's lots of information out there, but there also is the danger of false information. We hear a lot about that today. So what is your research process like when you're trying to decide which Americans to profile? Because I would assume it's like you go down a rabbit hole and there are a lot of people that had a great impact, but you need to make sure the information is correct. So take me behind the scenes on how you decide who belongs in this book.
Well, that's a great question. So each of the books has 40 individuals in it, and again, they're a diverse group. In the 20th century volume, which I'm working on for next year, I
Right.
started out with a list of over 200 people who are very worthy, and then cull that down to 40 individuals now as I write that volume. In this current volume, for example, we have 358 quotes. I've already pulled 400 quotes for the next volume because I want people to speak in their own voice in addition to my analysis. And as I said, one of the things I wanted to do was look for displays of that can-do spirit where they grabbed opportunity or did things to display that. And that oftentimes was what differentiated who made the cut and who didn't. And then, yes, I'll use the internet, but I've been a lifetime reader. And so I have a library. I like works that have been out for a long time because most of them have been judged, whether they are accurate or not. I look for corroboration of multiple sources in there as well. And I'm just trying to give a profile, not a detailed biography, hoping to attract people who are not necessarily voracious readers, but who want to learn about individuals. And then if they want to go further into it, there are other more detailed works available.
One of the things I liked about the last book in the series about the 1700s was just what you touched on, that you've got these sort of bite-sized profiles or a couple of pages apiece where you can sort of go top line on folks. And then if you want to dig into it, you can. Was that done intentionally on your part, that you wanted to try to hit the highlights and get folks interested in history again? Was that in your process at all?
Well, absolutely, because none of the material I've looked at has anyone taken the viewpoint, the AmeriCAN spirit. They talk about the individual and what they did and maybe their individual thoughts, but they've never looked at it from that particular standpoint. So I think it's unique. And to me, I think that's the binding because of our political liberty and economic freedom that we have in this country. That to me is the combustion, if you will, that created that can-do spirit that people who have contributed so much to our country grabbed a hold of.
The story you mentioned about Billy Lee, who was a slave owned by George Washington, makes me wonder about your thoughts on these historical figures, the ones that are well known at least, and mythologizing them and making them seem to be bigger than life. And certainly there's been a lot of talk in the last, I don't know, a couple of decades about how, there's a whitewashing of history and how we're tamping down the bad stuff that happened and only celebrating good things and maybe making some things seem better than they were. What say you to that argument?
Well, that's a great question. And what I see today are the people who complain the most have created nothing generally. They've never done anything but complain, and so it's easy to stand outside and throw rocks. And so I want to celebrate those positive things because none of us are perfect.
Right.
No human being, past, present, or future, is perfect. We all make mistakes. We all make bad decisions. And if we jump on everyone at the first bad decision, then we discourage any positive situation from them coming about. So I want to encourage people. In the preamble of the Constitution, it says the first objective is to form a more perfect union. That acknowledges that the country and individuals are imperfect, but yet we should strive to be more perfect all the time. Vince Lombardi of the Green Bay Packers said they would practice and try to achieve perfection, but he acknowledged that perfection was not available to achieve, but if they chase perfection, they would achieve excellence. And it's the same thing in our lives.
Yeah, it's baseball season, and it reminds me of the old baseball analogy. If you don't swing for the fences, you never hit a home run, right?
Exactly. Exactly. So I want to celebrate the positives.
Let's talk about the new book, this new volume of Americans Who Made America, and this is all about the 1800s, pivotal century. There was a lot happening there. The Old West, the Transcontinental Railroad. I can't even imagine where you start with that. So, where did you start trying to figure out what you're going to highlight? You said it's always 40 individuals, right?
Yes. Well, actually, in this volume, there's 42 because we have Lewis and Clark from the expedition. and the Transcontinental Railroad with Judah and Grenville Dodge. So you get a bonus, 2 individuals in this volume.
Is there an upcharge for that bonus, or are we okay?
And actually, there's 3 because my favorite story it involves a 3rd individual as well. And that's a story I love to tell because I think it's inspirational for people today also.
Well, listen, don't just tease it. If this is your favorite story, you got to give it up.
So let me jump into it.
All right.
People that know I'm from Texas, and I love Sam Houston, who was a terrific leader for Texas. He was our George Washington, commander of the Army of Independence, 1st and 3rd president of the Republic, governor. And so there's so many things that I've spoken on and written on about Sam Houston. But what I discovered only a year or 2 ago was something that his mother did that, to me, she continues to change Texas and America by one act that she did.
All right.
And what happened was he was 19 years old. He was going to war with Andrew Jackson down in the Southeast. His mother got him out on the back porch to bid him farewell and said, if you show courage, you'll always be welcome home. If you show cowardice, never darken my door again. Then she pulled out a very simple silver ring and gave it to him. Inside that ring was the single word, honor. Sam Houston put that ring on, wore it every day the rest of his life, over 50 years, and died with it on. That ring is at the San Jacinto Museum outside of Houston to this day. And so what I envision there, he had so many decisions to make during his career. And I can just envision him sitting there contemplating a decision and twisting that ring on his finger. And while he's doing that, he can hear his mother's voice and he can think the word honor. What's the honorable decision? And so when I think about that, how many decisions were affected by that ring and that one word, honor? His mother died in 1831, had no idea of the impact of that on him or even beyond that. And so when I speak to groups and tell that story, I mention that I wish my parents would have given me an honor ring. And I encourage them to consider getting honor rings for their children or grandchildren as well. And we never know, if they do that, what effect it may have on those kids' lives and lifetimes beyond ours.
That's a great story. I've never heard that story either. And that's in this book, AmeriCANS Who Made America, all about the great 1800s in our country. I think my own parents consider giving me an honorary ring, which is a whole different thing, ornery. So Richard Battle is our guest today on the Big Time Talker podcast and Zoom Into Books. His new book is available now from Headline Books. You can find it online, ask for it at the bookstore, and do a deep dive into history. So Sam Houston, pretty well-known guy, portrayed, I think, by Billy Bob Thornton in a movie not too awful long ago. Tell me somebody in the 1800s that I've never heard of, but you thought the story was worthy of including.
Well, here's another great story I discovered fishing around looking for great people.
Okay.
And it was a lady named Sarah Breedlove, born in 1867, first woman born in her family after the emancipation, and first free person born in her family. She was African American, and she left home at 13 to get married because her home life was so bad. And she did jobs like picking cotton or taking in laundry, hoping to earn $1 a day, had this just menial life that you can only imagine the hardship. And she had a scalp condition, and she couldn't find anything that would give her any relief from the irritation of her scalp. And so she concocted her scalp, her head. And so she concocted a formula that helped her. She told her friends, let them try it. They liked it. She sold it to them. So she started a company to make it to sell to others named Madam C.J. Walker. And she changed her name to C.J. Walker. She ended up becoming the first self-made Black woman millionaire in the United States.
Wow.
But to me, what's so much more impressive and such a great example is she didn't just sit back after she succeeded. She became a philanthropist, and she made it her mission to help other young Black women to succeed. And so that to me is what's so important, because to live our fullest lives, it's important for us to go out and be all we can be, and then to help those who follow so we can repay the favor that we've been given by those who came before us.
That's just one of the stories in this book that Richard has curated and written called AmeriCANS, AmeriCANS, Who Made America. Um, you mentioned earlier the Transcontinental Railroad, where I guess the East met the West. And, I remember reading about that. I lived in Utah for some time, and you can go to Promontory Point where you see the Golden Spike put in. I would assume that young people today, my 20-year-old son who's in college, probably can't even fathom why that was such a big deal. So why was that such a big deal? Why did you mention that?
Man, what a great question. And that's the picture we have on the cover. One
Right?
of the toughest things is deciding what picture to use that represents that century. And I thought about putting a picture of the flag from Fort McHenry on there, other things. But if you'll remember, in the 19th century, we had, as the subtitle says, growth. Then we had the division of the Civil War, bitter 4-year war, 600,000 soldiers dead. And then it took years and years and years for the country to heal. And one of the healing things was when the two railroads, the Central Pacific and Union Pacific, joined at Promontory Point, May 10th, 1869. That brought the country east and west together. And that helped facilitate bringing the rest of the country together as well. And that's something that I think is important for us today, because I have people ask me when we're doing interviews about, do you think we can ever come back together? And part of my answer is, well, we came back together after the Civil War. And if we can come back together after something like that, we can come back together now. But it's going to take big people in leadership to put aside selfish interest and put the country first, like they did during the founding and like they did after the Civil War.
Love that. And I guess you could equate it almost to how important it was when we were kids and with the first moon landing. It was that big a deal, maybe a bigger deal.
Well, yes, and people don't realize that for many, many years into the 20th century, the railroad industry was the largest industry, the largest employer in the United States. And so the railroads were a huge deal for many, many years.
Richard, this is again the 1800s. And look, I'm going to date myself a little, but when we were kids, like most kids of that era, we played cowboys and Indians. And in the last couple of decades, more and more has become known, been made more public about the mistreatment of Native Americans during that time in history. And so I wonder how you dealt, or if you dealt at all, with Native Americans, and if any of them are represented in your book, and if so, how.
Well, and they have been in both volumes of this series so far. And in this volume, I highlighted Chief Red Cloud. And he was a great leader of the Native Americans in that period, involved with negotiating treaties with the U.S. government. And his number one quote that I used, which to me bashed the United States, if you will, was that he said that the whites promised him many, many things in their negotiations. But the only thing they ever promised him that came true was when they told him they were going to take his land away from him.
Oh, man.
And the rest of it was all incorrect. So, yes, he is in there. He was a great leader of that era and community, and worthy of celebration as well.
Abraham Lincoln make the cut?
Well, yes. I mean, it'd be hard to write a book about the 19th century without Lincoln, and there's people on both sides. But what fascinates me about him is not only the things he did while president, but the road he took to become president. It'd be almost impossible today for someone to do that, because if you look at his history, he lost several elections, only won a couple, but his perseverance through all those ups and downs to become president during a time of turmoil was an interesting example. It shows us that we never know if we persevere during our adversities and continue on a path, where we'll end up. And he's a great example of that.
When you look at somebody who's super famous like that, and there have been hundreds of books written about them, and
Yes.
dozens of movies and all that, are you ever able to find something new that you go, I never knew that about this person?
Well, yes, and the Sam Houston story about his mother is another one because I didn't know that story until
Right. And you're a
a
Texas
year
boy.
or two ago, and I've been Texas nearly all my life, and that was an amazing story. But I look for things that are less likely to be known and definitely not emphasized. I look for those inflection points of where someone's life may have turned and they went from being an anonymous individual to something much greater than they had been because of an opportunity or something that happened. And then they used that AmeriCAN spirit to really go out and succeed.
Let me ask you, as somebody who's a student of history, and you've written this is the third book, I guess, in and around the subject. Why is it that in 2025 America, um, there seems to be such a, I don't know, disconnect or distrust of the institutions and the people, more importantly, that made this country great? Do you have any theory on that?
Well, yes, I think there are some people who want us to have a more totalitarian, collective type society.
And what do you mean
Some
by
of
that?
them are,
Define totalitarian,
well, our country was founded on individual rights from God.
right?
And some people still want to have that. And there are others who believe that government is the be all and assigns rights and that we're collective groups. And so they look at people in groups: men, women, black, white, Christian, non Christian. They break people into groups, whereas our founders looked at everyone as individuals. We have a republic versus a democracy. A
Okay.
democracy can lead to mob rule. Aristotle said republics decline into democracies, democracies degenerate into despotism. And so, if you'll remember in the Pledge of Allegiance, which is hardly said anymore, you pledge allegiance to the flag and to the republic for which it stands. And so, a republic protects individual and minority political viewpoints. A democracy doesn't. And so, democracies degenerate into despotism or totalitarianism. And so, I believe it's important for us to maintain our individual rights individually, not because I'm a man or white necessarily, but because I'm an American. And every American should have the same individual rights as every other American.
That makes sense. Ships rise and sink on your own merits. The Civil War that you mentioned, you certainly can't talk about the 1800s without delving into that. And I'm very fortunate, Richard, to live in Washington D.C., right outside D.C., close to the Manassas battlefields, Antietam, Gettysburg, and I would encourage anyone who's listening to make a pilgrimage and see where these things happen. Would you think of the Civil War as the most pivotal moment in America's history?
Well, certainly for the 19th century, because the country could have broken apart then, and the country we know today would not be the same. And so there was a mortal threat to the country. War of 1812, we had a threat, but that was from England trying to negate our independence. So the Civil War in the middle of that century, and it took decades to heal from that. And maybe even longer to some people because it
Sure.
was very bitter. People killing brother against brother, relative against relative. I mean, it was just tragic how we turned on ourselves. And so surviving that was not a given. But I think the people who led us out of that gave us that opportunity, and hopefully we won't squander it in this century.
You mentioned Sam Houston. You're a very proud Texan. Is it fourth or fifth generation Texan? Fifth generation, is that right?
Yeah, yeah.
If as a fifth generation Texan, you guys have probably more state pride than just about anywhere, with the exception of my home state of West Virginia. I think we could arm wrestle for that one. Um, but with the Civil War, and I think about whether there's a pushback on whether you should um, idolize, mythologize, look up to folks that fought for the South and Southern causes. Should Jefferson Davis, who was the president of the Confederacy, be recognized in history, celebrated as a great American, or as a treasonous traitor? And all those folks. Stonewall Jackson. You could go on and on. Again, you're a history guy. I want to know what you think about that.
Well, I think that's a good question, and it depends on what someone's looking at. And for the record, Sam Houston was governor of Texas when secession was voted on. He was against secession. And not only did he lose the vote, he was run out of office after the vote.
Good to
So
know.
he was a very principled leader in that standpoint. But the people who fought on both sides fought on principles they believed in. And so to me, first, we need to acknowledge that it was a principled fight versus just a mob type fight or something of that nature. Now, depending on how someone's going to be recognized, that's different. If we look at the American Army posts that are argued over sometimes, the reason that they gave some of those named after Civil War generals was to help heal the country, to put an olive branch out. And for the people who were in the South, Reconstruction after Abraham Lincoln was killed was not what Abraham Lincoln envisioned, where it was going to be softer, but it was much more bitter from the North, the pain inflicted on the South, how the South was robbed of assets and resources, taken back to the North as plunders of war. And so that created a lot more animosity. So in the healing process, naming those generals on army posts was one way to try to help reunite the country, that we're one country together. Yes, we've had this disagreement. Let's move past that and be together. So I think looking at it in context is very important.
So this leads me to another question. You said you're working on the 20th century book now. You've got these two volumes that are about people who have been gone for decades, if not centuries. What happened in their lives happened in their lives. 10 years ago, we might not have had an issue with Bill Cosby being included in your book. Today, we would. How are you going to surf that fine line with people who are still around and figure out whether they make it into a 20th century AmeriCANS who made America?
Well, that's a great question, and you're asking me to reveal a little of the secret sauce here. So I
Come
learned
on
a
now.
lesson the hard way in one of my previous books where I wrote about somebody who was still alive, and now I'd like to get my eraser out, maybe leave them out.
Cut that
And so
chapter.
one of the premises in this series is that I'll only consider someone who's already passed, and that way there's nothing that can happen later. Their entire lives are done and recorded, and we can look at it in that perspective.
That's interesting. The bobbing and weaving of the whole thing. Um, how long does it take you to put one of these things together? It
Well,
seems like
that's a
a lot
great
of research.
question, also. And of course, we're doing this while working on this book, the new one, while we're just now getting this one out. And
Sure.
so, and doing other things. So, generally, it'll take about a year. I've already started working on the next one, and hopefully, we'll have it ready sometime mid year next year as well.
Is it fun for you to do the research, or is that the slog you have to do to make a great book?
Well, no, it's fun because one, I like to learn, I like history, and it's inspiring because, like I say, we can learn things from those people that can help us in our lives and help us help others. Oliver Wendell Holmes, Supreme Court Justice, said, "A mind stretched by a new idea never returns to its previous place." And
Hmm.
so we never know when, where, or what an idea might pop into our heads is that will change our lives and those people we impact and influence. And that to me is like prospecting for gold, because when those ideas come up, that's when it's exciting. Wow, I wish I'd thought of that before. And I encourage people to be lifelong learners. I encourage them to share with their kids and grandkids. Don't rely on the schools to teach them what they need. Lead the path for them, to show them how to become an American with that can do spirit and be the best they can be.
I love to read books like this. And the book we're talking about is AmeriCANS, Who Made America, where you learn interesting things, but maybe you take away a life lesson too. But Richard, along with being a big reader, I'm a big music guy. I've loved music my whole life. And as I've gotten older and I talk to other folks that are my age, they tend to say things like, oh, the music just isn't as good as when I was growing up. The 60s were the best decade, or the 70s or the 80s, and today's music is no good. I wonder your thoughts on, are the Americans who made America all in our rearview mirror, or are there great Americans here today?
Well, there's great Americans of all stripes here today. The only inhibition is if we have our media, politicians, influencers, if you will, distracting and discouraging people, telling them they can't do what their parents and grandparents did. That's a distraction. That's why it's so important for us to encourage others that you can be all you can be. I, are we going to succeed at everything? No. We're going to fail, and we're going to have to lift ourselves up and overcome that to succeed again. But that's one of the great things in life, is to help someone when they're down and watch them come back up and be more successful than ever. Every person that I've studied who's a great success or was a great success failed one or more times and overcame it. And that to me is one of the great lessons. We need to encourage resilience and overcoming adversity for people to reach their best success. I'm a believer also that we will succeed multiple times until we reach a level where we fail. And if we never reach that level of failure, it means we've never reached our top level of performance, because we all have limits and we all ought to seek where that level of failure is, knowing that we attained everything we could.
So, lots of people today say America's best days are behind them. What say you?
Well, you get what you wish for. And as Henry Ford said, there are those that think they can and those that think they can't, and they're both right. The people who think the best days are over are going to live miserable lives because they've destined themselves to be no better than they are today. And that negative attitude will not help others. I believe you can't achieve anything positive with a negative attitude. So the people who are going to take advantage of opportunities are the people with positive attitudes, realizing that everything won't be positive.
Attaboy, I like it. A dose of optimism, a battle's bullet, if you will, from award-winning author Richard Battle. The new book, again, is AmeriCANS, Who Made America, and it's all about the 1800s. And what is the subtitle again?
19th century growth, division, and reunification.
Richard Battle, thanks for being here today.
Always my pleasure.
Best of luck with the new book. And thank you for being with us today, whether you're watching online on social media, checking out our YouTube channel, or checking out our podcast that we release every Tuesday, the Big Time Talker podcast. Thank you for being here. Thanks to our partners at Headline Books. We love you. Whatever you do, wherever you go, make it a great day. Bye, everybody.